Watch right now on the Front News project. Russia's oil ports have been destroyed, Ust-Luga is burning again. These are strikes of retribution. Record losses for the Russian army. Putin is gathering new cannon fodder and preparing for total mobilization. And also Ukraine's counteroffensive in 2026. The armed forces are driving the invaders out of the south of the country. Fiery, hot and blazing. Watch Frontline footage right now. Greetings, I'm here with you, Sergei Malnev. Let's get straight to the main topic. Ukraine does not leave the barbaric air attacks by the Russian army on Ukrainian cities unanswered. Strikes on military facilities in Krasnodar and of course Ust-Luga confirm this. Yes, by invading Ukraine, Putin has personally brought the war into the homes of his own Russians. Here are the details.
Russian territory is once again in turmoil.
Some kind of sound, something flying. Well, where is it flying? Ugh. Good thing I set up the camera down. If it explodes there, it'll be like a nuclear blast. It'll just be a whisper.
As usual, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported bravely. Overnight, they claimed to have shot down more than 100 Ukrainian drones in 9 Russian regions, as well as over the waters of the Sea of Azov and over temporarily occupied Crimea. How many were actually shot down is unknown, but the fact is, some got through. Krasnodar, in particular, was hit. There, one of the drones crashed into a multi-story residential building. Local authorities reported 3 people injured. The Rostov region was also awake all night. The head of the region reported that they were attacked by more than 60 drones. Taganrog was hit as well. There, as a result of falling debris, residential buildings caught fire. And once again, Russian air defense is to blame. Russian air defense was operating directly over residential buildings. Local residents filmed their supposed repelling of the attack. But in the Samara region, either the air defense didn't work or, as always, it turned out to be useless. As a result, residential buildings in Tolyari were not damaged. The same can't be said for the Kuybyshev Azot chemical plant, which was already attacked on March 11th. The enterprise is among the 10 largest in Russia's nitrogen industry, and there, once again, one got through.
There's more smoke behind the building over there.
Smoke. The daily strikes on Russian cities are forcing officials to make excuses to the Russian people. On federal channels, Kremlin loyalists continue to insist that Russian air defense is the best in the world. But now there's a new talking point. It turns out these strikes are not scary at all and are even good for Russians.
I state with full responsibility, we have the best air defense in the world and our air defense is the best. No one else has anything like it. No one has it today. And the fact that sometimes a drone manages to reach quite deep inside the country is on the one hand even a good thing, because we gain experience in repelling massive raids.
But even the so-called military bloggers have stopped believing the Russian officials. And after seeing how drones have been setting fire to the Ust-Luga port for several days now, they shared a terrifying suspicion.
In light of all these events, there are only 2 possible explanations. If suddenly, when enemy nuclear missiles are launched at us, the air defense simply leaves the chat in the same way, a proper retaliatory strike might not even happen, because it could very well turn out that the state of the strategic missile forces is consistent with all the other structures of the Russian Ministry of Defense. In other words, they limit themselves exclusively to impressive reports. But we won't have time to find out about it. By the way,
speaking of Ust-Luga, this oil terminal port continues to be hit by Ukrainian drones. For almost a week now, things have been consistently heated there. And the president of Ukraine does not hide the fact that the attacks on Ust-Luga are a response to strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. And official Kyiv is even ready to stop these responses. For this, it is enough for Moscow to stop its attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
we are not just striking, we are responding. Why am I reminding you of this? Recently, after the global energy crisis, we have been receiving signals from some of our partners asking how to reduce our responses against Russia's oil and energy sector. If Russia is willing to stop striking Ukrainian energy infrastructure, we will not retaliate against theirs.
But as long as the Kremlin hesitates, Russian territory will continue to see action and lose money. However, Ukrainian drones and missiles are unlikely to be upset if they need to keep working.
And now, an analysis of the situation on the blazing Pokrovsk front line. Fierce fighting continues. Since the beginning of the day, the occupiers have tried 14 times to push our soldiers out of their positions on the Pokrovsk front in the areas of the settlements of Rodinske, Pokrovsk, Rushine, Udakhne, Novonikolivka and Molodetska. 3 clashes are still ongoing. And at the same time, in March 2026, the Russian army suffered record losses. But it is not only Ukraine's defense forces that are eliminating the occupiers. Russian infantry is increasingly engaging in self-liquidation. Ukrainian soldiers are also disposing of Russians thanks to insoles. How is that possible? Watch our report and you'll understand everything.
The first month of spring brought a new anti-record for the Russian army. In March, a high number of losses in the Russian army is being recorded. In addition to the elimination of Russian forces by Ukrainian soldiers at the front, there is daily video evidence showing Russian infantry resorting to self-destruction.
For 2026, this is quite a high figure. It's not high for 2025, since in 2025 we saw the number of eliminated Russian occupiers reach 40 to 41,000. For example, in March 2025, it was 41,160 personnel, and in December, 35,000. Nevertheless, as a starting point for the beginning of 2026, more than 30,000. Losses of Russian occupiers' personnel in the third month, this is quite a high figure.
Most often this happens after injuries sustained as a result of drone attacks or in situations of complete encirclement by Ukrainian drones. This was reported by Ukraine's Minister of Defense, Mikhailo Fedorov. According to him, such behavior is a consequence of decisions made by the Kremlin's military political leadership. In particular, Russian propaganda convinces people that the situation is under control and that they have superiority. However, the real picture on the battlefield is significantly different.
The number of suicides in the Russian military is only increasing. And this concerns not just suicides in rear conditions. There is a large number of verified suicides, already exceeding 450. These are only the verified cases that have been captured in photos or videos. When we take into consideration the unverified cases, even independent monitoring groups and professional analysts openly admit that the actual total number could potentially be 5 times higher than the officially verified cases. That is an incredibly high and concerning figure, roughly once a day or once every 2 days. Some drone or another records a suicide.
In addition, according to the minister, the Russian command effectively forbids soldiers from surrendering, promoting the narrative that it is better to die immediately. At the same time, the losses of the Russian army continue to grow rapidly.
March could set a record for the number of Russians killed. The dynamics of the defeats indicate that, thanks to the Ukrainian defense forces, enemy losses will exceed 30,000 severely wounded and killed.
The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense is also making an interesting announcement. They say that reaching the mark of 50,000 losses in a month could have catastrophic consequences for the Russian army. The agency hinted at possible additional measures to intensify this trend. The Ukrainian army is also resorting to more creative methods of eliminating the enemy. Ukraine is sending insoles with explosives to the occupiers at the front disguised as humanitarian aid. This was reported by Forbes. Ukrainian intelligence officers allegedly placed explosive insoles in shipments for Russian military units, which were transported with the help of Russian volunteers and charitable foundations, allowing them to be disguised as ordinary humanitarian aid.
Each insole contains 1.5 grams of TNT. Such a tiny charge will not destroy a vehicle or a bunker. However, if it hits a foot at close range, it can cause serious injury.
The first shipments took place in early March and may have amounted to tens of thousands of units. At the same time, it is reported that the scheme was only partially uncovered after a mistake by one of the participants. Ukrainian agents used at least one intermediary blindly. That is, this person may not have known the true nature of the cargo. This mistake, according to Militarny, helped the FSB identify one of the shipments.
Recently, the number of 200s among Russian troops has been steadily and systematically increasing. By the end of 2025 and the beginning of 2026, this figure was about 60 to 65% of the total monthly losses. In other words, the Russians are losing, more and more personnel are being killed rather than wounded, although generally speaking, the average historical ratio of those killed in action compared to those who are wounded is approximately 1 to 3. On average, 1 killed for every 3 wounded.
The Ukrainian president also made an interesting statement about Russian losses. According to the head of state, the current ratio of Ukrainian to Russian military losses is about 1 to 8, in Ukraine's favor. Zelensky noted that at the beginning of the full-scale war, this ratio was much lower, about 1 to 3.
Now let's analyze the situation on the Kostiantynivka front. The enemy is becoming more ferocious here as well. On the Kostiantynivka front, the invaders carried out 11 attacks near the settlements of Kostiantynivka, Kleban, Bik, Pleshchayevka, Novopavlivka, Stepanivka and Sofiyivka. One clash is still ongoing. Ukrainian missile and drone airstrikes are becoming more frequent and effective. Most recently, a flamingo was used to stir things up at an explosives factory in the Samara region. And partisans from the Atesh movement in the Novgorod region created a corridor for Ukrainian drones to pass through. Details in our next report.
The Ukrainian flamingo dominates the Russian skies. The Kremlin lacks sufficient air defense resources. You could see as if something was flying, and then towards the factory. The strike came from somewhere over there. Oil ports, military-industrial facilities, and refineries are under daily attack from missiles and drones. Somewhere over there in Russia. All forces are thrown into protecting the dictator, his palaces and residences, as well as Moscow. There aren't enough air defense resources even for Putin's small homeland, St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region. There's this kind of smog, black everywhere, just smog. While flamingos are striking over 1,000 kilometers deep into the Russian Federation, hitting military-industrial complex plants in Chapayevsk, hundreds of drones reach Russia's northern capital every day.
The longer the war goes on, as you may notice, the higher the level of weaponry used by the armed forces of Ukraine becomes. Therefore, as they say, the longer the war lasts, the more losses Russia will suffer.
Ukraine is focusing on the powerful oil infrastructure of the Leningrad region. In recent days, the Kirishi oil refinery, as well as the ports of Primorsk and Ust-Luga, have come under attack, as well as the Slavneft oil refinery in the Yaroslavl region. According to experts' estimates, about 30% of all Russian oil passes through these 4 facilities.
The destruction of depots, the disruption of logistics routes, that is, strikes on... These are highly significant and strategic transportation hubs and vital international seaports. And in addition, strikes on enterprises of the military-industrial complex. This is a necessary measure because many of them are within range of even our simplest drones. And strikes on enterprises of the fuel industry. That is, fuel producers, as is well known, oil is the blood of war.
On Goebbels TV, for lack of any reasonable explanation of what is happening, they invent fables about Ukrainian drone dominance in the Russian rear, cunning plans, and training of personnel.
I state with full responsibility, we have the best air defense in the world, and our air defense is the best. No one else has anything like it. It simply doesn't exist today. And the fact that sometimes a drone manages to reach quite deep somewhere, on the one hand, that's even good, because we gain experience in repelling massive raids.
In reality, however, Kyiv's success in aerial attacks on Russian territory is determined by several factors at once. First, the effective operations of the Ukrainian armed forces using Medstrike drones to hunt down enemy air defense systems. Second, sabotage by Ukrainian partisans behind Russian lines. For example, in the second half of March, the Atesh movement burned several key Russian electronic warfare nodes that were obstructing drone routes. The economic aspect is no less important when it comes to strikes on Russia. The Kremlin's protective measures, whether it's laying carpets in airports or cutting off internet access in villages and cities, hit the wallets and comfortable lives of millions of Russians.
No matter what happens with the ultimate end result, whether the drone reaches its pre-selected target or not, the Russian economy continues to suffer truly massive economic losses. In
the near future, ballistic missiles will also join the strikes on Russian territory. There will be plenty of work for the Ukrainian equivalent of ATACMS.
And now let's move to the Hulyapol direction of the front. The bloody rampage of the enemy army continues. And here, in the Hulyapol direction, the defense forces successfully repelled 6 enemy attacks. In the areas of Hulyapol, Bilohiria, and toward the settlements, Starokrainka and Zalisnikhne, the enemy carried out airstrikes in the areas of the settlements of Vozdvizhevka, Novoselivka, Shairoke, and Sharivne. At present, one battle is still ongoing. Better than the Americans themselves. Ukrainian defenders are handling the Patriot systems so skillfully and effectively that even US military personnel are now learning from them. In addition, our experts are training and assisting air defense personnel from Middle Eastern countries in countering Iranian missiles and drones. More details to follow.
Zelensky's first foreign trip where Ukraine is not seeking weapons but offering them. The president made a sudden business tour to the Middle East, which is expected to result in multi-million-dollar defense contracts.
This is an opportunity to emphasize Ukraine's role, not just as a petitioner, not just as a country that is constantly waiting for help, not from someone else, but as a country that can provide assistance, that can offer serious support and help. And that's why we can say that this is such an initiative. Our leadership is right. It is good to help the countries of the region.
As Bloomberg writes, Kyiv states that it is ready to share its experience in intercepting Iranian drones, which are now massively attacking the countries of the Persian Gulf. In exchange for scarce American missiles and investments in our defense industry,
Ukraine has the greatest experience in the world in using drones. We are offering the countries of the Middle East and the Gulf a partnership that is beneficial to both sides. Our knowledge and technology in exchange for their funding. And we are working to make this a reality. Our contribution to security in this region will also become a true contribution to global security.
it is worth noting that it was the Arab countries themselves who initiated such deals. Having assessed the effectiveness of our air defense, Saudi Arabia proposed a deal for the supply of our electronic warfare systems and interceptor drones. There are also private requests made to Ukraine. For example, the oil giant Saudi Aramco. The request is the same, to sell and teach them how to use Ukrainian drones.
Protecting their infrastructure right now, frankly, isn't really feasible without Ukraine either. We can already see this in Saudi Arabia and various other Arab countries. They understand this perfectly well. And now, they are strengthening their cooperation with Ukraine precisely because only Ukraine has the capabilities, technical expertise, experience, and know-how to protect infrastructure facilities and cities.
At the same time, Ukraine is trying not just to sell a batch of UAVs, but to establish a reliable long-term partnership and provide real assistance, because using Patriot missiles against Iranian drones has proven to be an extremely expensive solution, even for the wealthiest countries.
We are trying to help them because they were not very well prepared for drone attacks. They may have been better prepared, perhaps even for missile attacks, but nevertheless, they used a huge number of missiles to shoot down Iranian targets.
A response to help. Ukraine hopes to attract investment not only for itself but for all of Europe by building a reliable defense strategy for its partners and the entire continent.
They understand that the current task for Europe is to achieve complete independence in the field of security so that there is no dependence on America when it comes to specific protection from America, including the transfer of certain types of weapons. They also need to produce everything they require for their own security domestically.
Moreover, as practice has shown, producing and even using American weapons in Ukraine can be done better than by the Americans themselves. In a recent report, the US command acknowledged that the Ukrainian armed forces use Patriots more effectively than any other country that possesses them.
They work, I can tell you that with absolute certainty. From my point of view, this is a success story. To be honest, at first I had some doubts. It's a very complex system. We train our guys for a very long time so that they can operate them. But the Ukrainians trained their people, and now they feel as comfortable working with the Patriot as a fish in water. And in fact, now we are learning from their techniques for using these air defense systems.
As a result, today the Ukrainian armed forces are teaching their Western partners how to use their own anti-aircraft systems and Middle Eastern militaries with Ukrainian interceptor drones, having established what is arguably the best air defense system in the world. Now the question is about resources and scaling up. And that was the main goal of Zelensky's trip to the Middle East. And
now let's analyze the situation on the southern Slobozhansky and Kupiansk directions of the front. The Russian world continues to advance here as well. In the southern Slobozhansky direction, the enemy twice assaulted the positions of our units near the settlement of Vovchansk and towards Katneva. In the Kupiansk direction, the enemy tried 5 times to improve its position towards the settlements of Novosina and Kupiansk. About 500 square kilometers have been liberated and 11,000 occupiers have been neutralized by the Ukrainian armed forces as a result of the offensive in the south. What is happening on the front at this very moment? More in our military review.
the Ukrainian armed forces repelled the largest Russian attack since the beginning of the year in the area of Oleksandrivka. According to the command of the 37th Separate Marine Brigade, the situation has been fully stabilized and the enemy has suffered significant losses in equipment and manpower. I should note that it is precisely the Oleksandrivka direction that remains a zone of intense fighting today, as the Ukrainian armed forces have launched a counteroffensive here to stop the occupiers' advance. Deeper into the Dnipropetrovsk region. In the
territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region, there are actually no Russians left at all now. There weren't that many of them there to begin with. They only managed to seize a small piece of the Dnipropetrovsk region. But that's it, even in that small piece. We have also seized the initiative, and already from there, we've practically burned them out from everywhere already.
At the same time, the Ukrainian command backed up this information with figures. During the fighting in this direction, 10 settlements and hundreds of kilometers of our territory have already been liberated.
According to the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Defense Forces, about 500 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory have been deoccupied. These are significant achievements. If we take into account the fact, what about the territorial gains on this side? During the same period, that's about 50 square kilometers. That is, for the first time since 2025, the Ukrainian Defense Forces have shown that they are capable of conducting successful counteroffensive operations. In
turn, the Russians have been trying for several months to organize their own offensive from Pokrovsk. Yesterday, there was a new attempt to strike at the Ukrainian armed forces from the flanks. However, this did not bring any success. In
the Rodinsky area, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to stabilize the situation. There has been no further advance. In the area of Hrishin, similarly, the Ukrainian armed forces successfully prevented further advances deeper into the settlement and taking control of the logistics by the Ukrainian armed forces.
But the Russians still got a result. That result is a multiple increase in their own losses. According to analysts' estimates, most of the Russian personnel do not even make it to their first battle, but are destroyed by drones on the approach.
For many Russians, their entire military career boils down to seeing Pokrovsk and dying. There are significantly fewer Russians who make it to Pokrovsk than those who, on the contrary, end up leaving Pokrovsk. By the way,
Ukrainian units managed to increase their effectiveness not only by mowing down Russia's frontal assaults, but also, contrary to all Soviet textbooks, during offensive operations.
Even during tactical counteroffensives, our loss ratio improves dramatically. In defense, it's about 1 to 3. By the way, just according to the classics, just like in the textbooks, wherever we seize the initiative, the loss ratio is 1 to 5 or 1 to 6 in our favor. That's why now, everywhere we can, we are seizing the initiative.
As experts explain, the tactic of small counteroffensives is actually the strategy of the Ukrainian armed forces for 2026. Advances in the Zaporizhzhia direction, success in the Dnipropetrovsk region. These are all links in the same chain. The objective is perfectly clear. To advance in those sectors where Moscow is pulling out its reserves, and when the forces become equal, to switch to another direction and launch new breakthroughs. Within the framework
of those, let's say, people we have there, At the front, it has been decided that even tactical counteroffensives are still more beneficial for us now than just sitting in deep defense and waiting for the orcs to attack in waves.
At the same time, drone forces are helping the infantry on the ground as much as they can. According to the report of the head of the SBS, over the past 24 hours, 3 Smerch and Tornado S multiple launch rocket systems, a reloading vehicle, and a multiple launch rocket system base were destroyed. In Crimea, a strike was also carried out on the launch sites of Russian strike forces.
These are the unmanned aerial vehicles that we simply call drones. In particular, there are fewer radars. The Russians simply stopped seeing Ukrainian drones, which have become even more numerous. This makes reconnaissance drones better able to detect launch preparations. Here are the same Shahid of Gerberg. Well, Ukrainian strike drones have the ability to destroy such launchers.
At the same time, our drones also struck 2 new installations, enemy air defense, thereby opening new flight routes for missiles and drones, deep into the Russian Federation.
That's all for today, but very soon on the Front News program, new unique reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, obtained so that you know the truth. This was Sergei Malnev with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.